During the first week of December, Ashen was released quietly with next to no marketing and very little attention from games journalism as a whole. It was developed in the Unreal Engine by a small development studio out of New Zealand that I had never heard before, called A44, and because of its engine, the game released on the new Epic Game Store for PC, while appearing also on the Xbox Marketplace. I picked up a copy on PC to have something lightweight and casual to play while traveling for the holidays for a few hours here and there, and I discovered quickly that this wasn't going to be the forgettable, throwaway title I'd initially thought it would be. Let's go ahead and get the inevitable out of the way. The game draws its inspiration heavily from Dark Souls, both mechanically and stylistically. Ashen is a stamina-based action RPG that takes place in an often dark, dreary world, the husk of past civilizations painted with muted colors and eerie ambiance. However, just like with its source inspiration, the effect is striking, and the feelings produced work tremendously towards the overall cohesion of the project. We're going to come back to this later when discussing the artistic aspects of the game, but do know that I love this and I think most of you will too. As you begin your adventure, it's shown to you that the world is and has always been bathed in darkness, broken only by the existence of the Ashen, an immortal race of creatures made of light. Their existence is marked by endless cycles of life and death, and the game's events take place under the backdrop of a great Ashen's death, more specifically its final 3 breaths. Each breath signifies one of the 3 ages of the world, and with each age, the birth and evolution of new peoples. The primary races are the Brawl, creatures of night and dark, the Listeners, who revered the Ashen's light and built cities in its excellence, and finally, mankind, who inherited a broken, dying, graying world. We start the game during this closing age of mankind, tasked with uncovering the failing Ashen and rebirthing it, thusly flooding the world with light once more. Very soon after debarking on your quest, you come across a small hovel known as Vagrants Rest. This will act as a base of sorts during the entirety of your playthrough. Characters you meet along your journey will head to Vagrants Rest under your instruction and will build it into a fledgling town as you advance. Several of these characters will act as a combination of companion and quest giver and have their own stories that you will unfold as time moves forward. The game will have you explore a variety of regions as you move toward your end goal, finding items and upgrades and companions along the way. This is the basic structure of the game, overly simplified, but we'll go into more detail in a little bit. For anyone who has played through the Souls series, this is all going to sound extremely familiar, as it should, because the developers here made no bones about what they were doing. Where other games like this can often feel like a soulless ripoff of the Souls formula, Ashen feels like a love letter to it, painstakingly assembled and thoughtfully curated so as to capture the feeling and nostalgia of Dark Souls, but simultaneously making their own mark on the genre, which they most certainly do. The combat is similar, as you might expect. You will find and equip a great many different one-handers, two-handers, and shields, each with slightly different properties or movesets, expending stamina through attacking, blocking, and dodge rolling. While the combat doesn't innovate in any serious way, it is both snappy and weighty as it should be, and feels good to engage in every time you swing your weapon or roll under a blow from an enemy. The one thing that Ashen does do differently is through the inclusion of an upgradeable lantern held in your offhand. Many areas of the game are nearly pitch black, and you will need the lantern to navigate and engage enemies. The catch here is that you aren't able to hold a shield or a two-hander while equipping the lantern, and if you want the ability to block or use a heavy weapon, you'll need to put the lantern down while fighting, limiting your range of visibility to a smallish radius around it. This is clever, because it forces the player to choose a disadvantage during these times, whether it be heavily obscured vision or the inability to fight at full capacity. This could have very easily been a serious annoyance if the mechanic had been misused, but A44 strike a very healthy balance during these encounters that helps raise tension while also showcasing the beauty of the game's light-dark aesthetics. Some of these delves into the darkest, deepest caves and dungeons the game has were among my favorite times during my playthrough. Through use of the game's rune system, you can augment your build to help with this by gaining a stun effect while using the lantern, or gain additional stamina recovery to allow further dodge rolling. Now, the rune system itself is pretty basic, but does provide just enough customization to scratch the itch for character building. You will unlock a number of greater runes, of which you can slot 1 at a time, and also slot 4 from a selection of lesser runes. The greater runes provide buffed advantages. One of the first, and also my favorite, is Akuto's Guile, which provides additional attack power for each swing you take until you take damage. Lesser runes will generally provide things like a percentage buff to stam regeneration, or the aforementioned stun chance for your lantern. There are many of them in the game, and you unlock them at a pretty decent clip. Some of these runes will come from advancing your companion's quests, but this is just one example of what they can provide. First and foremost of the benefits your companions offer is that you can bring one of your choosing with you on your adventure. At first, I was not a big fan of this, as having a companion with you significantly lessens the difficulty of the game. They hit very hard and they can take a ton of damage before they go down, able to siphon aggro off you when fighting against a crowd of enemies. If either one of you runs out of health, you can be revived once before having to return to the last shrine you visited, unless both you and your companion go down together. This is one of the big deviations from the Soul series. This game's difficulty is pretty mild. Don't get me wrong, you're going to die, probably a lot actually, but you aren't going to be coming across any Lothric Knights out in the wild, and none of the game's bosses are going to be on the level of the Nameless King. Not even close. This is made really apparent by having a partner who can soak damage for you. Even more so when an actual player takes the spot of your companion, which is the way the developers chose to implement multiplayer. I never took advantage of this myself, but the game does offer matchmaking if you choose to play with a friend, or a random player, which will be a big pro for a lot of people. As I mentioned, at first I was very unhappy to find the game so much less punishing than Dark Souls, but I have greatly warmed to the idea after completing the game. This makes the game much more relaxing, and exploration is far less stressful. And that's good, because exploration is a primary pillar of the title. Secondly, this game is far more accessible to players new to the genre, and that is a very good thing. Souls-likes can be a daunting experience for first-timers. The brutal difficulty of Bloodborne and the complicated stat scaling of Nioh can certainly push people away from the genre altogether. In Ashen, everything feels very straightforward and inviting without sacrificing the fun to be had. In fact, I would go on to say that Ashen isn't just a very good game in of itself, but is also a supremely positive landmark for the genre, an open invitation for players who enjoyed it to move on to its more advanced cousins. Now, your companions do more than help in combat. They will act as your vendors, your blacksmiths, your source of upgrades for throwing javelins, healing gourds, and lanterns. They are critical to the progression of your character. I'm pretty sure it's possible to completely ignore the companions altogether in order to beat the game, but you'll find yourself much worse for the wear if you do so. In fact, it became one of my favorite traditions to return to Vagrants Rests after an exploratory venture to see that they had built new structures and had new things for sale. It doesn't hurt at all that their writing is as superb as their voice acting, making them a joy to listen to as they talk about their stories and how they're going to make you stronger. All the services they offer will often cost scoria, this game's version of souls, that you'll pick up while killing enemies and will drop if you die yourself. Gone forever if you die again before recovering them. In lieu of checkpoint bonfires, this game offers shrines that will act as respawn points, and later in the game as fast travel options. These shrines are spaced perfectly, leaving you to traverse great distances before finding another, and I can't stress enough how wonderful this is. The highlight of this game to me, more than anything else in it, was the level design and the world itself. The world is big, conveying a sense of emptiness and loneliness despite being packed full to the brim with secrets, items, and enemies to discover. I mentioned earlier how the game follows the traditional route of using drab color palettes in old ruined civilizations, accented by towering landmarks and bursts of color here and there. It is beautiful. And paired with the game's truly exquisite soundtrack and ambient sound engineering, it stands as a true masterpiece in this regard. It is an absolute joy to explore, with consumables and gear hidden literally everywhere, around every corner, and above every peak. I can't tell you the number of times I jumped and climbed my way up a structure, convinced that the devs had never intended players to be able to reach there, just to find a hidden hallway that had a brand new weapon, shield, or scoria stash in it. There's some good variety to the regions and landscapes themselves. Some of them are clear favorites of mine, but I can promise you that I thoroughly enjoyed scouring every inch of all of them, especially the regions that comprise the second half of the game. The entire game, its mechanics, art direction, sound design, and story work together with a sense of marvelous cohesion that is rarely found in many of today's modern AAA games, and deserves a great deal of attention that I don't feel that it has yet received. I do have one complaint though. And although it isn't such a severe detriment to the game as it could have been, it is a flaw that shines brighter because of how perfect the rest of the experience is, and that is the variety of enemies and weapons. The game has a ton of enemies and even more weapons for you to use. Seriously, I think I picked up well over 35 weapons while playing, and all of them are functionally identical. There are heavy attacks and light attacks as is standard among all of them, but the attacks of each of my axes, maces, and mauls are just about the same. They are different. Each might be a fraction of a second quicker or have an inch extra reach on it, but ultimately they all behave the same way to the point where I can pretty confidently say it doesn't matter which weapon you use or upgrade. You're probably going to play the game the exact same way regardless. There are a few exceptions to this rule. The hook weapons have a jab attack instead of a horizontal slash, and certain two-handers have overhead slams instead of the usual side-to-side motion, but it isn't enough variety. With all of the weapons you can find in the game, you would think there would be some real choices to make when it comes to which you use, but you'd be wrong. When compared to the drastically varied movesets and gameplay styles to be found from other Souls-like titles, this can be a bitter pill to swallow. I can only imagine it was a sacrifice made in the name of abolishing skill points for attributes, but I don't feel it was a necessary one, especially because the rune system picks up some of the slack of getting rid of base attribute points. It would have been incredibly nice to be able to make more focused character builds. This is true also when discussing enemy attack patterns. Although there may be a bunch of different enemy models, you aren't going to come across anything too unique. There are some enemies that dash, some enemies that do AoE damage around them, and then enemies that attack with identical movesets to your own. The one situation where this isn't true is in the boss battles, but they don't take it far enough. Same as above, I can guess it was made this way to allow the game to be more accessible to genre newcomers, but it's sorely missed. The best way I can sum this thought up is that while combat is always satisfying, it is never exciting. The rush of well-executed combat found in similar titles is missing in this game, and if it had been present, the lack of difficulty would have been far less obvious. When I bought Ashen, I did so under the presumption that I would probably never finish it, let alone try to collect everything inside of it, and boy was I wrong. This one grabbed me in a way that I wasn't at all expecting, and at its modest release price of $40, it is one that I emphatically recommend to any fans of the Souls genre, and especially to anyone who has ever looked at a game like Dark Souls with interest, but didn't have the time to commit to learning its systems, or isn't a fan of games that are crushingly difficult. Ashen is a game made for that kind of person, and it's one of the only titles available today that so effectively fulfills the need for a Souls-like entry point. It is solemn and hopeful, eerie while familiar, and gorgeous in its humility. It is one of my favorite games of the recent past, and it has now put A44 Studios on the map, leaving me in eager anticipation of what they will give us next. If you have the time and a little bit of extra money, please give it a go. Thank you for sticking around until the end of the video. Please like and subscribe, and if you want to know first when new content is released, make sure you press the notification bell. For those of you who have been fans of the channel, I know it's been a long time since I last uploaded. Personal life and work have been chaotic over the last few months, but that period is coming to a close, and I am committed to putting out more regular content like I was doing over the summer. I can't tell you how appreciative I am for each of you watching, and I would love to hear from you guys down in the comments if you've played Ashen and want to discuss it, or if you have any more questions about the game or the channel. Again, thank you so much, and I'll catch you guys next time.